Britain had finally succeeded in getting the US on its side. Mossadeq, fully aware of the shift in the American stance, made one final desperate plea. Having already refused to sell oil to Communist China and the Soviet Union, Mossadeq offered an ultimatum. Iran would sell oil to the US at a 40% discount. If the US rejected the offer, then Mossadeq would be left with no choice but to sell oil to the Soviets. The American response was that it couldn't discuss any oil deals so long as an agreement on compensation with Britain hadn't been reached. It became clear to Mossadeq that the US was now firmly on Britain's side. British MI6 and American CIA had already been in discussion over potential coup plots in November of 1952. However, under the Truman administration, the CIA still believed that supporting a staunch anti-communist like Mossadeq, rather than trying to overthrow him, was the surest way to prevent communism taking root. The discussions led to naught. During the same month, Anglo-Iranian officials met with Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt and head of CIA operations in the Middle East. The officials presented Kermit with a coup plot named Operation Boot. Roosevelt returned the plan to Allen Dulles, the CIA deputy director. Dulles, knowing Truman's sympathy for Mossadeq, decided to keep the plan secret until Eisenhower would come to power and Dulles would become the new director of the CIA, and his brother, John Foster Dulles, would be made Secretary of State. Meanwhile, Britain was already busy attempting to overthrow Mossadeq itself. In February 1953, an anti-Mossadeq rebellion by Bakhtiari tribal leaders, instigated and armed by MI6 and the Shah, was crushed by the government. The same month, on February 28th, Ayatollah Shari, a British-backed Shia cleric and rival to Mossadeq, organised a mob to march on Mossadeq's home. The mob broke into his home and threatened to kill him. Mossadeq escaped over the back wall in his pyjamas. It became clear that neither Britain or the Shah alone possessed the power to overthrow Mossadeq. In March 1953, a new round of discussions began between MI6 and CIA officials in Washington. Operation Boot was modified and renamed Operation Ajax. The plan was finalized and then approved by both the British and the Americans in mid-June. The plan comprised of four main components. The first was to begin a propaganda campaign portraying Mossadeq as a communist. The second, to encourage the opposition to create disturbances. The third, to pressure the Shah to remove Mossadeq from power and select a new prime minister. And fourth, to support Fazlollah Zahidi as Mossadeq's replacement. With the propaganda campaign and support for the opposition well underway, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf arrived in Iran on August 1st, armed with large bags filled with millions of US dollars. Schwarzkopf met with Zahidi and the Shah to assure them of US support. Roosevelt also entered Iran secretly under alias James Lockbridge, and on the same day met with the Shah to discuss the execution of Operation Ajax. The Shah was to issue a decree to dismiss Mossadeq and replace him with Zahidi. On August 15th, the commander of the Imperial Guards, accompanied by 3 truckloads of soldiers, arrived at Mossadeq's home to issue his dismissal. Mossadeq's guards overwhelmed the soldiers and called for the immediate arrest of Zahidi, who was being hidden by the US in its embassy compound. The Shah, upon hearing of the coup's failure, fled to Baghdad, and the US began drawing up plans to pull Zahidi and Roosevelt out of the country. Roosevelt, hoping to make use of the failed coup attempt, hired a large crowd at the cost of $50,000 to pose as communist Tudor members and riot through the streets of Tehran, attacking mosques and statues of the Shah. Roosevelt also stepped up the propaganda campaign to link Mossadeq with the rioting communists. In preparation for the second coup attempt, the CIA began bribing army and police officials. August 19th was the date set by the CIA for its next attempt to overthrow Mossadeq. On the morning of August 19th, the same mob, hired 2 days earlier to pose as communist rioters, entered the center of Tehran and began threatening and intimidating passers-by and drivers to display pictures of the Shah. The police, having already been paid off, failed to intervene. The mob, then armed with knives, clubs, chains and sticks, began marching on Mossadeq's house. The CIA had told the mob to do everything possible to ensure the mob get as much attention as possible. Taking the advice rather literally, the mob had hired wrestlers, tumblers, jugglers and clowns. Zahedi came out of hiding from the US Embassy and drove to the state radio station to announce his takeover. The Shah's Imperial Guards began attacking Mossadeq's house with artillery, Sherman tanks and bazookas. Mossadeq had once again managed to escape over the back wall. The ensuing battle between the Imperial Guards, the hired mob and Mossadeq's guards claimed over 300 lives. Among those killed were the hired mob members who had been found with money still in their pockets, given to them that very morning by CIA agents. The same day, Zahedi declared himself Prime Minister, and the following day Mossadeq surrendered himself to the Shah's forces. With Mossadeq finally removed from power, an estimated $7 million had been spent on the CIA operation. Zahedi immediately imposed martial law and began rounding up and executing nationalist leaders. Mossadeq himself was spurred execution by the US's request and was sentenced to 3 years solitary confinement, and would live the rest of his life under house arrest until his death on March 5, 1967. With Mossadeq taken care of, negotiations over Iran's oil reopened. Britain's reliance on the US to help remove Mossadeq had come at a price. With opposition to British control of Iranian oil still strong, Britain was forced to concede only a 40% share. The remaining 60% would be divided up between the Dutch oil company Shell with 14%, the French company CFP with 6%, and the remaining 40% split between American oil companies Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of California, Socony Vacuum, Texaco and Gulf, each with an 8% share. The new concession granted oil rights for the next 25 years and renewable for a 30-35 year term. Iran would get 50% of the profits, but would have no hand in managing the company and only nominal control. The final agreement was signed on August 29, 1954. The oil companies then came to a further secret agreement between themselves to control the production and price of the oil. The coup was a landmark event. It was the first successful coup carried out by the newly formed CIA and would become the model for all future CIA coup operations. The coup had exposed Britain's diminishing power and influence in the region, which would soon find itself eclipsed by the United States. But the true repercussions wouldn't be felt until decades later, following the Iranian Revolution in 1979. The CIA had helped remove a popular elected democratic leader and a man dedicated to the principles of democracy and liberty, and helped reinstate and strengthen the autocratic rule of the Shah. The US would continue to back the Shah's military oppressive regime as an American ally in the region until its eventual overthrow in the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The Shah's regime would be replaced with an Islamic Republic established by the Shia Muslim cleric Ayatollah Khomeini. The new fundamentalist regime would use its strong anti-American stance to try and strengthen its influence in the region. The coup, viewed as being in the US's own national interest, had seriously backfired, and we, and especially those in the Middle East, are still dealing with its profound repercussions today.